My name is Carol Peterson. I'm 69 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my greatest achievement was my son Kevin. Now, I know my greatest achievement was surviving him. Before I tell you how I sold his entire inheritance out from under him and vanished without a trace, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The sun was high in that big Texas sky, the kind of Sunday afternoon in Austin that feels like a warm blanket. The smell of barbecue smoke hung in the air, a familiar perfume of charcoal and sizzling meat. My house, the one my late husband David and I poured our souls and our salary into for 40 years, was humming with life. It was our family's Sunday barbecue, a tradition I'd kept alive long after David was gone. It was my anchor. I was in the kitchen, humming along to an old song on the radio, placing the last of the perfectly grilled burgers onto a large ceramic platter. My son Kevin and his wife Tiffany were in the garden waiting. From the window, I could see them standing near the rose trellis David had built for me on our 25th anniversary. Seeing them there in the heart of our home should have filled me with joy. But lately joy felt distant. With the platter in my hands, I pushed open the screen door, letting it slap shut behind me. The scent of cut grass and blooming roses hit me. It was perfect. A perfect family afternoon. That's what I told myself anyway. As I stepped onto the flagstone patio, I heard their voices drifting from behind the big rose trellis, their words muffled at first. I paused, not wanting to interrupt, and that's when I heard Tiffany's voice sharp and clear, a whine that always set my teeth on edge. I just don't get why she won't co-sign the loan, Kevin. It's not like she's using the money. We need that for the promotion for our future. I froze. They were talking about the business loan again, the one they wanted me to secure with my house. The house that was paid off, the only real asset I had left. I heard Kevin let out a long, weary sigh. The kind of sigh he used to give me when he was a teenager and I'd ask him to do his chores. I know, Tiff, he said. His voice was low, tired. It would be so much easier. There was a pause. I should have walked away. I should have made a noise, cleared my throat, anything to let them know I was there. But my feet were cemented to the ground. In that silence I heard the chirping of crickets, the distant laughter of a neighbor's kid, the thumping of my own heart in my ears. Then Kevin spoke again, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a conspiratorial tone that chilled me to the bone. Sometimes, I just wish Mom would die already. She's a constant burden. The world stopped. The ceramic plate felt slick in my hands. My breath caught in my throat. Burden. The word echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. The platter tilted. A slow-motion disaster I was powerless to stop. The crash was deafening as it hit the stone. Shattered porcelain and perfectly grilled burgers lay scattered across the flagstones at my feet, a grotesque sacrifice on the altar of my son's wish. My legs wouldn't move. The air turned to ice in my lungs. I was a statue, hidden in the shadows of the patio, just feet away from the two people who were supposed to be my family. From behind the trellis I heard Tiffany laugh, a sharp metallic sound. Well, don't say that too loud, she giggled, completely oblivious. At least not until the will is updated. They laughed about something else a moment later, completely unaware that they had just buried me alive. But they were about to learn that even ghosts can fight back. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark of my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, packed thousands of lunches and kissed thousands of scraped knees. The silence in the house was a living thing. It was heavy, suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. My son's words, constant burden, played on a loop in my head, a cruel soundtrack to the memories flickering before my eyes. Tears wouldn't come. That surprised me. What I felt was a cold, hollow emptiness, like I'd been scooped out with a spoon, leaving nothing but a fragile shell that could shatter at any moment. My mind drifted back, pulled into the undertow of the past, back to a different kind of silence, the one that fell over this house 31 years ago, the day the world ended for the first time. Kevin was only 8 when his father, my David, went to his construction job and never came home. A sudden massive heart attack on a high-rise scaffolding, they said. One minute he was the roaring, laughing center of our universe, the next, he was a phone call from a grim-voiced foreman. I remember holding Kevin's small hand at the funeral, his face buried in my black coat, his small body trembling. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of lilies and the quiet sobbing of friends, I made a silent vow. I would be enough for him. I would be both mother and father. I would build a fortress of love and sacrifice around him so he'd never feel the full, crushing weight of that loss. And I tried. God, how I tried. I was a registered nurse at St. David's, and I took every extra shift I could get. 16-hour days became my norm, fueled by stale hospital coffee and sheer willpower. I'd come home long after the sun had set, my feet swollen and my back a single, solid ache, to a quiet house where a babysitter was dozing on the sofa. But my work wasn't done. There was still homework to check, uniforms to iron for the next day, and a little boy who needed his mom to tuck him in. I'd sit on the edge of his bed and read to him, my voice hoarse until his eyes grew heavy, his breath evening out as he finally drifted to sleep, clutching a t-shirt of his dad's that still faintly smelled of sawdust and him. I gave up everything. A promotion to head nurse that would have required more travel and management hours? I turned it down. The old beat-up sedan I drove? I kept it for 10 years past its prime so the money could go into his college fund. Vacations were trips to the local state park, not Disneyland. My life, every single minute and every single dollar was poured into that boy. My salary, my time, my heart, it was all his. I thought that kind of sacrifice would forge an unbreakable bond. For a while it did. He was a sweet, sensitive kid who held my hand, brought me clumsy bouquets of dandelions from the yard, and told me I was his hero. But then came Tiffany. He met her in his last year of college. She was polished and ambitious, with eyes that seemed to see right through me to the equity in my home. The change in Kevin was insidious, a slow poisoning I didn't recognize until it was too late. He started calling less. When he did visit, he'd look around the house with a stranger's critical eye. "Mom, this wallpaper is so dated. You really should get a new car. This one is embarrassing." It was always Tiffany's opinion, parroted by him. I first felt like a true outsider at their wedding. I had offered them a substantial amount of money from my savings for the down payment on a house, but they'd waved it away, saying they'd rather have a lavish wedding. During the mother-son dance, he held me stiffly, looking over my shoulder for Tiffany, and whispered, "Can we speed this up? Tiff wants to cut the cake." It was a small thing, a tiny cut, but it bled for weeks. After they got married, the distance became a chasm. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a free hotel for the holidays, a convenient place for them to drop in when they needed something. They never asked about my work, my friends, my life. I had become a background character, a service provider in the story of my own life. I had excused it all. "He's busy," I tell my sister Laura. "He's building his own life." But sitting there in the dark, with the ghost of his words hanging in the air, the excuses turned to dust. All those little cuts, those moments of casual disregard, they weren't just him being busy. They were the symptoms of a terminal sickness. I realized the boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a greedy stranger wearing his face. And in that cold, quiet kitchen a plan began to form. A plan born not of revenge but of survival. The wish for my death wasn't born in a vacuum. It was the ugly final bloom of a plant they had been watering with greed and entitlement for years. Their weapon of choice was always money. My money. They had been tightening a financial leash around my neck for so long, I had almost mistaken it for a necklace. It started about a year ago when Kevin was laid off from his marketing job. A corporate restructuring, he'd called it, a term that made it sound like a noble sacrifice rather than a failure to perform. Tiffany worked as an assistant manager at a clothing store, but her salary alone wasn't enough to support the lifestyle they felt they deserved. The downtown apartment with the rooftop pool, the leased luxury cars, the weekend trips they flaunted on social media. So the loans began. At first it was small things presented as dire emergencies. "Mom, can we borrow $500? The car needs new tires, and we just don't have it. Our rent is going up, we're just a little short this month, can you help?" I always said yes. How could I not? He was my son, and the fear of him struggling was a raw, open wound in my heart. I'd transfer the money, and the loan would never be mentioned again. Then came the credit card incident. They were going to visit Tiffany's parents in California. The night before their flight, Kevin called in a panic. "Mom, my card just got declined. I think it was flagged for fraud. Can we please just use yours for the rental car? I swear I'll pay you back the second we get home." The panic in his voice felt real. I gave him the number, my stomach twisting with unease. They didn't just use it for the rental car. They used it for 5-star hotel rooms, for dinners at restaurants I could never afford, for a shopping spree on Rodeo Drive. I found out when the bill arrived a month later. Over $10,000. When I confronted him, his voice was full of manufactured surprise. Oh my God. I had no idea Tiffany spent that much. She must have gotten carried away. We'll pay you back, Mom, I promise. Just in installments. The first and only installment of $200 arrived 2 weeks later. After that, silence. But the pinnacle of their audacity came 3 months before that fateful barbecue. They sat me down in my own living room, on the sofa David and I had picked out together 40 years earlier. They presented it like a business meeting. Tiffany did most of the talking, her voice dripping with a false saccharine excitement that made my skin crawl. They had a once-in-a-lifetime business idea. A high-end, organic, gluten-free bakery for dogs. It's a completely untapped market in Austin, Carol, she'd said, her hands gesturing wildly as if she were giving a TED Talk. People treat their dogs like children here. They'll pay anything. We've run the numbers. It's a gold mine. Kevin just nodded along, a hopeful, desperate look on his face that I knew so well. It was the same look he had as a boy when he wanted a new bicycle. I asked to see their business plan. Tiffany slid a thin, glossy folder across the coffee table. It contained a few pages printed from the internet about the pet industry, some photos of cute dogs, and some crude financial projections that looked like they'd been scribbled on a napkin. It was a fantasy woven from delusion. So, Tiffany had said, getting to the point, her eyes gleaming, all we need to get started is a business loan. $200,000. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. And how do you plan to get a loan of that size? I asked, keeping my voice even. You have no collateral and Kevin is unemployed. Tiffany's smile was predatory. That's the best part, she chirped, leaning forward. We don't need collateral. You do. We just need you to co-sign. Or even better, just take out a home equity loan on the house. It's paid off after all. That equity is just sitting here not doing anything. I stared at her, speechless, the blood roaring in my ears. She was talking about my home. My security. The one thing David and I had worked our entire lives for. She spoke of it as if it were an inconvenience, a pile of cash I was selfishly hoarding. I looked at Kevin, my son, praying to see some flicker of shame, some sign that he understood how monstrous the request was. I saw nothing but a greedy reflection of his wife's ambition. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room like a granite slab. Absolutely not. I will not mortgage my house for a dog bakery. It's out of the question. The mood shifted instantly, the temperature in the room dropping 20 degrees. Tiffany's face hardened, her mask of sweetness melting away to reveal the cold contempt beneath. I don't understand you, Carol, she said, her voice turning to ice. This is for your son's future. This is his one big shot. Don't you want to see him succeed? Is this how little you trust him? Kevin finally spoke, his voice thick with a sullen, practiced resentment. She's right, Mom. After everything I've been through with the job and all. It feels like you're betting against me. That was when Tiffany delivered the line that, at the time, I tried to forget. She stood up, smoothing her designer dress, and gave me a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. Well, this house will be ours one day anyway, Carol, she said, her voice a low, threatening purr. It would just be better for everyone if we could use it now. I had seen the greed in their eyes then, but I had chosen to ignore the sheer malice behind it. I told myself they were just desperate and lashing out. Now, hearing his wish for my death, I understood. It wasn't just about the money. It was about eliminating the person who stood between them and the prize. It was about removing the obstacle. And that obstacle was me. Their campaign against me wasn't just financial. It was psychological warfare. It was more insidious than asking for money because it was an attack on my own mind. Tiffany, I realized with a chilling certainty, had been playing a longer, darker game. A game designed to erode my credibility, my confidence, and ultimately my control over my own life. She was trying to paint me as a frail, confused old woman who couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. An old woman who desperately needed her loving son and daughter-in-law to step in and help. It was subtle, a death by 1,000 paper cuts, A campaign of insidious gaslighting. Started with my things. I'd put my reading glasses on the nightstand, a place I'd put them for 30 years, and the next morning they'd be in the kitchen drawer, nestled amongst the silverware. My car keys, always on the brass hook by the door, would suddenly be in my coat pocket in the hall closet, beneath a pile of winter scarves. Each time Tiffany, who would happen to be visiting, would find them for me with a theatrical, long-suffering sigh. "Oh, Carol," she'd say, her voice dripping with a sickly, condescending pity. "Here they are. You're getting so forgetful these days. You really worry me." She'd do it in front of Kevin, reinforcing the narrative, building her case against me brick by brick. "Honey, your mom seems to be forgetting things a lot lately," she'd say at dinner, right in front of me, as if I were a piece of furniture or a deaf child. "Maybe we should look into getting her some help. To manage her bills and things. It must be so overwhelming for her at her age." She even tried to poison the well with my own sister. Laura told me that Tiffany had called her, her voice full of fake concern. "I'm just so worried about Carol," she'd cooed. She missed a doctor's appointment I made for her last week, and she didn't even remember me telling her about it. I think her memory is really starting to slip. The truth was, she had never told me about the appointment. She had set me up to fail. For a terrifying month or two I fell for it. I started to second-guess myself. Was I becoming that person? The little old lady who couldn't remember where she put anything? Fear, cold and sharp, began to creep into my days. The fear of losing my mind, of losing my independence, of having the life I had built so carefully taken from me. That was their goal. If I was deemed incompetent, getting control of my assets, of my house, would be so much easier for them. A lawyer could arrange a conservatorship. They could get power of attorney. They could take everything, and they could do it all with sympathetic smiles on their faces, telling everyone they were just taking care of poor old Carol. But what Tiffany didn't count on was that 40 years as a nurse had taught me to be observant. I'd spent my career watching for subtle changes in patients, for signs that things weren't right, for the tiny tells that separated a real symptom from a fabrication. And I started to notice a pattern. My things only went missing when Tiffany had been over. The helpful suggestions only came after she'd created the problem. One day I decided to test my theory. I knew she was coming over that afternoon to help me sort my mail. Before I left to run an errand, I took a tiny piece of dark thread and placed it just inside the lid of my jewelry box on my dresser. A beautiful mahogany box David had given me that held little of monetary value but was filled with things of immense sentimental worth. When I came back an hour later, Tiffany was in the kitchen, humming as she made a pot of tea for us. "I sorted all your bills for you," she said cheerfully. I thanked her and went straight to my bedroom. My heart was pounding. I opened the jewelry box. The thread was gone. The contents had been subtly shifted. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just moving my keys. She was snooping. She was assessing my valuables. That's when I stopped being a victim and started being a detective. I started playing her game. I bought a small voice-activated recorder and left it under a cushion on the living room sofa. I pretended to be more forgetful than I was, just to see how far she would go. I'd lose my wallet and let her find it. I'd forget an appointment and thank her profusely for reminding me. I played the part of the confused, declining mother perfectly. All the while I was documenting everything. I kept a small notebook hidden in a heating vent in my closet. I wrote down every instance of her gaslighting, every misplaced item, every condescending comment. I even transcribed the recording I got of her on the phone with one of her friends, laughing about how clueless I was becoming and how it was only a matter of time before they could take over my finances. She thought she was planting seeds of doubt about my sanity. She had no idea I was gathering the evidence I needed to justify what I was about to do next. The morning after the barbecue, the Monday morning after my world had been shattered for the second and final time, I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I got up at dawn, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a chilling sense of clarity. The grief would come later. Right now it was time for action. This was no longer a family drama. It was a tactical operation. I opened my laptop, my fingers moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I searched for top commercial real estate firms, Austin, Texas. I wasn't looking for a friendly neighborhood agent who would put a cheerful for sale sign on my lawn and host weekend open houses. I needed a shark. Someone who specialized in fast, quiet, off-market sales to private equity firms and investors. I found a firm, a big, imposing name downtown with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. I called them the second they opened at 9 a.m. Thankfully, Kevin and Tiffany didn't live with me. They had their own overpriced apartment downtown. A place they constantly complained about but which served my purpose perfectly. They treated my house like their weekend getaway and future inheritance. A place to do their laundry and get a free meal. Their necessary absence during the weekdays was the opening I needed. It was the fatal flaw in their patient, predatory plan to bleed me dry. I was put through to a senior partner named Mr. Davies. His voice was all business, clipped and professional. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Peterson?" "I want to sell my house," I said, my own voice steady, surprising myself with its strength. "And I need it done quickly and quietly. I'm looking for a cash buyer, an investor. No open houses, no sign on the lawn, no public listing on the MLS. I want this transaction to be invisible." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. "That's a very specific set of requirements, Mrs. Peterson," he said, a note of professional curiosity in his voice. "Properties in your neighborhood are highly sought after. A traditional sale could spark a bidding war, likely netting you a significantly higher price. May I ask why the urgency and the secrecy?" I thought of telling him. I thought of pouring out the whole sordid story. But I didn't. This wasn't about seeking pity. This was about logistics. "I have my reasons," I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for argument. "They're personal. My price is $1.5 million firm. The conditions are non-negotiable. Can you help me or not?" I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating the potential commission on a 7-figure deal. The shark smelled blood in the water. "I have a portfolio of private investors who are always looking for properties like yours. They value discretion. I can make some calls. A cash deal can close much faster than a traditional sale. We could potentially have this wrapped up in 30 days or less." "Do it," I said. "The sooner the better." The very next day, a Tuesday, Mr. Davies brought a single investor to the house while Kevin and Tiffany were safely at their jobs. I had a moment of panic when Kevin sent me a text at 10 a.m., right when Mr. Davies' car was pulling up. "Thinking of swinging by for lunch, Mom. Got any leftovers?" My heart leaped into my throat. I typed back with trembling fingers. "So sorry, honey, have a plumber here all day, the house is a mess. Next time." It was a close call, a reminder of the tightrope I was walking. The investor was in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my first car. He walked through the rooms with a cold, appraising detachment, his eyes scanning layouts and fixtures, not memories. He didn't see the pencil mark on the doorframe in the kitchen where I'd measured Kevin's height each year until he was taller than me. He didn't see the faint scuff on the hardwood floor in the living room where David and I had tried to waltz after a little too much wine one anniversary. He saw square footage and potential return on investment, which was exactly what I wanted. He was buying a property, not a home, because it wasn't a home anymore. It was just a house. He walked through the entire house in maybe 20 minutes. Before he left, he stood on the front porch, looked out over the manicured lawn I had tended for 40 years, and made an offer to Mr. Davies. $1.5 million. Cash. We can close in 21 days. Mr. Davies looked at me, an eyebrow raised. "I accept," I said, without a moment's hesitation. I signed the initial paperwork right there on my dining room table, the same table where my son had wished me dead. The process had begun. The clock was ticking. 21 days. 3 weeks to erase a lifetime, to dismantle the fortress I had built for my son, the very fortress he now saw as his prison and my tomb. I had one moment of weakness that night. I sat on my bed, clutching a photo of a 6-year-old Kevin, his arm around my neck, a gap-toothed grin on his face. I almost called it all off. Then I heard his voice in my head, cold and clear. Constant burden. I put the photo down, my resolve hardening into diamond. For 3 weeks I moved like a phantom in my own home, packing away not just my belongings, but the memories of a life I was leaving behind. The hardest part wasn't selling the house. It was deciding how to deliver the final message. The 21 days of escrow were the strangest, most surreal period of my life. I operated with a kind of numb, focused efficiency, a woman on a secret vital mission. I moved through my days in a fog of purpose, my grief and anger packed away like the china, to be dealt with later. During the day, I went through the house room by room, a general sorting a lifetime of possessions into 3 distinct piles: keep, donate, and trash. Every object was a landmine of memory, and I had to learn to step carefully. In the attic I found a tiny bronzed baby shoe, so small it fit in the palm of my hand. I found a stack of Kevin's crayon drawings from kindergarten, one of them a lopsided portrait of me labeled, "The best mom in the rid." I found a photograph of David and me on our honeymoon in Hawaii, young and ridiculously in love, squinting in the bright sun, with no idea of the joys and heartbreaks that lay ahead. I allowed myself a single sharp pang of grief for each item, a quick intake of breath, and then I placed it in its designated box. The woman who had treasured these things, who had built a shrine to her past, was gone. I was someone else now, a ghost shedding her skin, and ghosts travel light. I found a company online that did full estate buyouts. A gruff but fair man named Sal came and walked through the house, making notes on a clipboard. He offered me a flat sum for almost everything: the heavy oak dining set, the living room sofas, the art on the walls, the rugs on the floors. It was a fraction of what they were worth, I knew that, but I didn't care. I wasn't running a business. I was staging an escape. I wanted them gone. The emptiness was the point. For the few things I wanted to keep, my photo albums, David's letters from when he was in the army, a handful of my favorite books, the ugly ceramic mug Kevin had made for me in a high school pottery class. I bought a dozen sturdy cardboard boxes and packed them myself, labeling them with a black marker and stacking them neatly in the corner of the garage. The most difficult part was maintaining the facade, playing the role of the mother they thought they knew. Kevin and Tiffany called a few times that first week, their voices laced with the usual blend of entitlement and complaint. "Hey Mom," Kevin said in one call, his voice distracted, the sound of traffic in the background. "So Tiffany's car is making this weird grinding noise. The mechanic says it's the transmission. It's gonna be like $3,000. We absolutely do not have it right now." So, he let the sentence hang in the air, the expectation clear. The old me, the pre-barbecue me, would have jumped in immediately. My mind would have been racing. Can I pull it from my savings? Should I put it on a credit card? My immediate instinct would have been to solve his problem, to absorb his stress. But the new me, the ghost in her own house, just said, "Oh, that's a real shame, Kevin. That sounds very stressful. I hope you can figure it out." There was a stunned silence on his end that was so profound I could almost hear it. "That's it?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You hope I can figure it out?" "Mom, did you hear me? $3,000. "I heard you," I said calmly. "And I don't have that kind of money just lying around, Kevin." It wasn't a lie. My money was no longer just lying around. It was about to be in motion, moving far away from his grasp. He grumbled something I couldn't hear and hung up on me. It was a small victory, but it felt like a turning point. During the final week, the house grew cavernous and empty. My footsteps echoed on the bare hardwood floors. I ate my simple meals of toast and soup sitting on a cardboard box in the kitchen. The house was losing its warmth, its life, and so was I. Or rather, I was shedding one life to make room for another. The inspector came for the final walkthrough, nodding in approval at the well-maintained structure. I signed the last of the closing documents with a hand that did not shake. The closing date was set for that Friday. I would need to be out of the house by 5 p.m. My car was already packed with my few boxes. The plan was in place. I had one last phone call to make, not to my son, but to the one person who I knew would deliver the news not just as a message, but as a judgment. The closing was scheduled for 2 p.m. that Friday. I didn't go. I had already signed everything. My lawyer, a quiet, efficient man who asked no questions, handled the final transaction. He called me at exactly 2:45 p.m., as I sat in my packed car in a shady spot at a public park a few miles away. "It's done, Carol," he said, his voice professional. "The funds have been wired to your new account. The house is no longer yours." I closed my eyes. A wave of something, not joy, not sadness, but a profound and absolute finality, washed over me. Felt like a fever breaking. For the first time in 31 years, I had no mortgage, no dependents, No one to answer to but myself. I was completely and utterly untethered. I sat in my car for a full 10 minutes, the engine off, and just breathed. In, out. The air felt different. Lighter. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I stopped at a name: Mark. Kevin's best friend since they were 5 years old. Mark was a good man raised by good people. He'd always been respectful to me, always called me Mrs. Peterson, and always had a look of vague, pained discomfort on his face whenever Kevin would make a casual, dismissive remark at my expense in his presence. I knew he had been there that day on the patio, had heard the same soul-crushing words I had. He was my only choice. He was the messenger who would understand the weight of the message. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Peterson? Is everything okay?" He asked immediately, a note of genuine concern in his voice. He probably thought I was calling about Kevin. In a way I was. "Hello, Mark. I'm fine," I said, my voice clear and even. "But I'm calling because I need you to do something for me. And it's very important that you do it exactly as I ask." "Of course," he said, sounding confused. "Anything. You know that. I know what Kevin said about me at the barbecue," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I didn't want his pity. I wanted his help. I was on the patio. I heard every word. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with shock and a deep, empathetic shame. "Oh my God, Mrs. Peterson," he finally whispered, his voice full of anguish. "I am so sorry. I didn't know what to say. I should have said something to him." "It's not your apology I need, Mark," I said, cutting him off gently. "I'm calling to ask you to deliver a message. He's supposed to meet you and some of the other guys for a drink tonight, isn't he? At Connolly's pub." Yeah," he stammered, caught off guard. "It's our regular Friday night thing. Around 7. "Good," I said. "When you see him, I need you to tell him something. Don't text him. Don't call him beforehand. I want you to tell him to his face in front of his friends. I need you to tell him this, and please use my exact words. Tell him, your mother heard you. She sold the house. She's gone. She said to tell you. You finally got what you wished for." There was another long, stunned silence. I could hear him breathing. "Jesus Christ," Mark breathed, the words more a prayer than a curse. "Mrs. Peterson, that will destroy him." "He destroyed me first, Mark," I replied, and for the first time a tremor of emotion entered my voice. "He just didn't have the decency to realize it. Now he will. Can you do that for me? As a final favor to the woman who used to make you and Kevin grilled cheese sandwiches after school." He hesitated for only a second. I heard him take a deep, steadying breath. "Yes," he said, his voice firm with a newfound resolve. "Yes, I'll do it. He needs to hear it." "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "You're a good man." I hung up before he could say anything else. That was the last tie cut. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life. I pulled out of the park and pointed my car west, away from the city, away from the life that was no longer mine. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me anymore. I drove for 3 hours into the heart of the Texas Hill Country, as the urban sprawl gave way to rolling green hills and ancient, sprawling oak trees. I drove to the small, charming town of Fredericksburg, a place known for its quiet pace and German heritage. A week earlier, on a scouting mission, I had walked into a local real estate office and paid cash for a small 2-bedroom stone cottage on the edge of town. It was a fraction of the size of my old house, but it had a wide front porch and a garden full of unruly wildflowers. Felt right. Felt like mine. The first morning in my new home, I woke up to the sound of birdsong, not the distant wail of sirens. I made coffee in my new unfamiliar kitchen and walked out onto my front porch. The air was crisp and clean and smelled of dew and earth. A family of deer was grazing peacefully in the field across the lane. For the first time in what felt like decades, a genuine, unforced smile touched my lips. The silence here wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was peaceful. It was possibility. It was freedom. I was finally free. But I knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and satisfying, that hundreds of miles away in Austin, my son's world was about to come crashing down around him. I found out what happened next from my sister Laura weeks later. She got the entire unvarnished story from a very shaken, very sober Mark, who felt he owed me the truth. Kevin and Tiffany arrived at Connolly's pub at around 7:15 p.m. that Friday, sweeping in with their usual air of frantic self-importance. They were laughing about something, complaining loudly about their respective work weeks. They slid into the worn leather booth where Mark and two other old friends were waiting, already nursing their beers. Kevin was in high spirits, the picture of a man without a care in the world. "Mark, my man," he said, clapping him on the shoulder with a little too much force. "You will not believe the week I've had. My boss is a certifiable moron. I swear. I'm carrying that entire department." Mark just looked at him, his face grim, his eyes cold. He didn't return the smile. He just took a slow sip of his beer. "Kev, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. Tiffany, who was already flagging down the waitress, rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh God, don't be so serious, Mark. Let us at least get a drink first. It's Friday, for crying out loud." "No," Mark said. His eyes locked on Kevin's, ignoring her completely. "This can't wait." Kevin's easy smile faded, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. His default setting when he wasn't getting his way. "What is it? Did you wreck your car again?" he asked with a condescending smirk. Mark took a deep breath. The other two guys at the table fell silent, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. And then Mark delivered the message, word for word. A payload of truth dropped into the middle of their casual Friday night. "Your mother heard you," he said, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the pub's cheerful noise. "At the barbecue. She sold the house. She's gone. She said to tell you. You finally got what you wished for." For a second, Kevin just stared at him, his face a blank mask of incomprehension. Then he let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh of pure, arrogant disbelief. "That's hilarious, Mark. Really funny. Did she put you up to this? My mom wouldn't sell her own shadow. She's probably just being dramatic, because I didn't call her back yesterday." Tiffany snickered, adding her support. "Yeah, seriously. She's probably trying to guilt-trip you into giving her more attention. Don't fall for it, honey." Mark just shook his head slowly, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "This isn't a joke, Kev. I'm not kidding." Kevin's condescending smile remained fixed on his face, but his eyes were starting to dart around, a tiny seed of doubt planted. "Sure it's not. Look, I'll prove it to you. This is ridiculous." He pulled out his phone, his movements full of a theatrical, dismissive confidence. "I'll call her right now, and you can apologize for being an idiot." He tapped the screen and put the phone to his ear, a smug look on his face. He waited and waited. The smug look began to curdle. His smile faltered. "She's not picking up," he said, a hint of confusion in his voice. "She always picks up. Her phone is practically glued to her hand." As he lowered the phone, a notification banner popped up on the screen. It buzzed in his hand, the vibration seeming to startle him. It was a new email. The sender was Zillow. Kevin had set up an alert for his own home address years ago. A little piece of vanity so he could track its value, so he could watch his inheritance grow with the booming Austin real estate market. The subject line read, "Your saved property at 123 Live Oak Lane has been sold." Mark said the change was instantaneous and horrifying. The color drained from Kevin's face, not just a little pale, but a waxy, sickly white. It was as if someone had pulled a plug and all the life and arrogance had flowed right out of him, leaving a hollow shell. His hand started to shake so violently he almost dropped the phone. "No," he whispered, his voice a hoarse croak, staring at the screen. "No. No way." Tiffany leaned over, annoyed. "What is it now?" She read the email over his shoulder, and her jaw dropped. "What the hell is that?" she shrieked, her voice attracting stares from the nearby tables. "That's a mistake. Call her. Call her right now." Kevin frantically started tapping his phone again, his fingers clumsy. "He tried to call my lawyer, the one whose card I'd left on the fridge for months. He got voicemail. He called my real estate agent, Mr. Davies. He got a crisp, professional voicemail. You've reached the office of John Davies. If you are calling about the property at 123 Live Oak Lane, that property has closed escrow as of this afternoon. The new owners will be taking possession in 10 days. Thank you for your interest. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered onto the table. The truth, cold and brutal and undeniable, hit him like a physical blow. The house wasn't just a house. It was his safety net, his future, his retirement plan, his emergency fund, his symbol of status, his inheritance. And it was gone. The pub was loud, but in their booth, there was only the sound of Kevin's ragged, panicked breathing. His nightmare was just beginning. The next morning, a Saturday, they drove to the house. I imagine the drive was mostly silent. A heavy, panicked quiet punctuated by Tiffany's hysterical accusations and Kevin's numb, monosyllabic replies. He used his emergency key, the one I'd given him years ago, just in case. Mark said Kevin later told him he could barely get the key in the lock. His hands were shaking so badly. He finally managed it and shoved the door open. They stepped inside, into a world of echoes and ghosts. The house was completely, utterly empty. The grand entryway, where a Persian rug David had bought on a business trip had once lain, was now just bare, scuffed wood. The living room, which had been filled with comfortable sofas, overflowing bookshelves, and a lifetime of family photos on the mantelpiece, was a cavernous, vacant space. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that slanted across the floor, illuminating a world that had been scrubbed clean of life. The dining room table where he had eaten thousands of meals without a word of thanks was gone. The chandelier still hung from the ceiling, a lonely, ornate skeleton. I was told Tiffany was the first to break the silence. She let out a scream of pure animalistic rage, a sound that was less human and more a raw expression of thwarted greed. She took it all. That crazy old bitch, she took everything. The furniture, the paintings, the silver. That was supposed to be ours. She started running from room to room like a madwoman, her voice shrill and hysterical, as if she could summon the furniture back through sheer fury. The sofa. The oriental rug. That was worth a fortune. Your father's watch. She probably sold it all. Kevin didn't follow her. He just stood in the middle of the living room, turning in a slow, disbelieving circle, his face a mask of shock. He walked into the kitchen. The gleaming granite counters were wiped clean. The fridge was empty, its door slightly ajar. He went upstairs, his footsteps echoing unnaturally in the stillness. My bedroom was stripped bare. Not a single trace of me remained. He went to his old childhood bedroom, the one he still used as a dumping ground for his old high school trophies, yearbooks, and boxes of junk he couldn't be bothered to deal with. That room too was empty. I had paid 2 young men from a junk removal service $200 to haul every last bit of it to the local dump the day before. His past, his trophies, his history, all of it was gone, buried under a pile of other people's garbage. He walked back downstairs, a zombie in his own former life, the sound of Tiffany's continuing rampage a distant, irritating buzz. That's when he saw it. On the gleaming empty kitchen island, there was a single plain white envelope. His name was written on it in my familiar neat cursive. With trembling fingers he tore it open. Inside were 2 things. The first was his emergency key to the front door, now useless. The second was a small folded piece of notepaper. He unfolded it. There were only 2 sentences, written in the same steady hand. You have 10 days to remove your personal items from the garage before the new owners arrive. The key is under the mat. It wasn't even signed. That was what finally broke him. Not the empty rooms, not Tiffany's screaming. It was the cold, impersonal finality of it. The casual dismissal. It was a note one might leave for a departing tenant, not for their only child. Tiffany finally came clattering down the stairs, her face red and blotchy with tears of rage. Did you find a letter? A will? Where did she go? Where's the money? Kevin didn't answer. He just slid down the kitchen cabinets until he was sitting on the cold, hard floor, the note clutched in his fist. He stared at the empty space where the kitchen table used to be, the place where he'd sat as a boy, complaining about his vegetables, the place where he'd sat as a man wishing his mother was dead. He had wished for me to be gone. Now, standing in the echo of his own cruelty, surrounded by the crushing silence of everything he had lost, he was finally truly alone. It would be weeks before I heard from him again, and when I did, it led to the final confrontation I had been preparing for since the day I walked away. For the next 3 weeks, my new life was punctuated by the ghost of my old one. My phone, which I had almost stopped carrying, became a portal to their escalating panic. I didn't answer, but I saw the relentless barrage of calls and texts. At first, they were from Kevin, dozens a day, their tone shifting wildly from furious and threatening, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," to desperate and pleading, "Mom, please, I don't understand, just call me." Then came the calls from Tiffany, each one a venomous, profanity-laced tirade left on my voicemail. Then they weaponized the family. Confused, concerned calls from my sister Laura. "Carol, what on earth is going on? Kevin is beside himself. He said you sold the house and vanished because you're having some sort of mental breakdown." They had fed her a carefully crafted story, painting me as an unstable, irrational woman who had suddenly snapped. After Laura came Tiffany's parents, leaving me a self-righteous, sanctimonious voicemail about a mother's sacred duty to her son and the importance of the family inheritance. I blocked them all one by one. I needed the silence. I needed to let the poison drain out of my life without them constantly trying to inject more. But I knew it couldn't last forever. I knew, for my own peace of mind, for the final satisfying click of the lock on the door to my past, I had to face him one last time. I couldn't let his narrative of my breakdown be the final word. I needed to draw a final indelible line in the sand. When an email came through from an address I didn't recognize, I opened it. It was from Kevin. The subject line was just one word: "Please." The message was short, stripped of its usual arrogance, and reeked of desperation. He said he would drive anywhere, do anything just to talk to me for 10 minutes. He said he was broken. He said he couldn't eat or sleep. He said he was losing everything. I knew I couldn't hide forever. I had to face him one last time, not for him but for me. To close this chapter for good. What happened at that little German cafe in Fredericksburg is something that will stay with me forever. You're going to want to hear this. I agreed to meet him. I chose the place. A busy, cheerful bakery and cafe in the middle of town, famous for its apple strudel. A public place. A neutral place. There would be no screaming matches, no dramatic scenes. I told him to be there at 10 a.m. the following Saturday. I arrived first, a full 15 minutes early. I wanted to be settled, to be in a position of control. I chose a small table in a bright corner, by a window overlooking the bustling Main Street. I ordered a hot tea and a pastry. I felt strangely, unnervingly calm. This wasn't a mother meeting her son. This was a final disposition. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The change was shocking. The confident swagger was gone. He looked like a ghost, a deflated version of himself. He had lost a significant amount of weight, his expensive clothes hanging off his frame. His face was pale and drawn, and there were dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes. He looked older. He looked haunted. He saw me and walked over, his movements hesitant, almost shuffling. He slid into the chair opposite me, not meeting my eyes. He just stared at his hands on the table. They were trembling slightly. "Thank you for coming," he mumbled to the tabletop. I didn't reply. I just sipped my tea and waited. The silence stretched out, filled only by the cheerful chatter of the other patrons and the clinking of cutlery against plates. It was a power play and we both knew it. He had to be the one to speak first. Finally, he looked up, and I saw the raw, bottomless desperation in his eyes. And then, as if on cue, came the anger. It was weaker now, but it was still there, his last line of defense. "How could you do this?" he choked out, his voice cracking, laced with a bewildered sense of injustice. "How could you just throw everything away? Our home. Our entire life. My future. You destroyed my life. Everything is gone." His voice was rising, and a few people at nearby tables glanced over with mild curiosity. I just sat there, my expression unreadable, my back straight, and let him vent. He went on, a torrent of accusations and self-pity. He talked about the humiliation of having to clear his childhood junk out of the garage while the new owners, a smiling young couple, watched him from their new front porch. He talked about how Tiffany had left him, packed her bags and moved in with her parents, blaming him for losing their inheritance, and calling him a failure. He talked about his financial ruin, about the future I had stolen from him. He painted himself as the ultimate victim, the wounded child abandoned by his cruel, unfeeling, and clearly insane mother. I let him finish his tirade. I let him empty himself of all his poison and his blame, all his pathetic justifications. And when he was finally out of breath, his shoulders slumped in defeat, a tear tracing a path through the stubble on his cheek, I leaned forward, set my teacup down gently on its saucer with a soft click, and said 4 words that stopped his world from spinning. "I heard you, Kevin." He stared at me, his mouth hanging open slightly. All the manufactured anger, all the practiced self-pity, evaporated in an instant. It was replaced by a flicker of pure animal fear. The raw primal terror of being truly and completely seen. "What?" he stammered, his eyes wide and unblinking. "What are you talking about?" He was playing dumb, his last pathetic defense. "The barbecue," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a judge's sentence in the cheerful sunlit cafe. "I was on the patio. I was bringing out the burgers for you and your wife. I heard you buy the roses. I heard you tell Tiffany that you wished I was dead. I heard you call me a constant burden. I heard her laugh. I heard everything." I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He looked like a cornered animal, searching desperately for an escape route where there was none. "Mom, he started, then stopped, his mind scrambling for an excuse, a lie, anything. "You don't understand. I was just stressed out. Tiffany was pressuring me about the business loan. I didn't mean it. It was just a stupid, horrible thing to say in the moment." I cut him off and my voice was as sharp as broken glass. "Stop lying," I said, hitting each word with a cold, precise force. "Don't you dare try to lie to me now. Not after everything. It wasn't just a thing you said, Kevin. It was the truth of how you feel, spoken when you thought I couldn't hear. It was the answer to every question I've had for the last 5 years. Why you never call. Why you look at me with contempt. Why you treat me like an inconvenience." I saw the fight go out of him, the lies crumbling in the face of the cold, hard truth. He slumped in his chair, a broken man. But to sell the house, to take everything, it was my inheritance. It was what Dad would have wanted. That word. Inheritance. The gall of him to invoke his father's name. "No, Kevin," I said, leaning in, my voice dropping low and intense for his ears only. "It was my house. It was my and your father's life's work. It was the result of his overtime on dangerous construction sites and my double shifts at the hospital. It was my security. It was never, ever your entitlement. You and your wife came to see me not as a mother, but as a bank account with a heartbeat. An obstacle to be managed until the funeral. An obstacle you wished would just die already to make your life easier." His eyes widened in shock as I continued, laying out the case I had built in my mind for weeks. "And it wasn't just that, was it? I know about Tiffany's little game. Moving my keys, my glasses. Forgetting to tell me about appointments. I know she was trying to make me, and everyone else, think I was losing my mind." I saw a flicker of genuine shock in his eyes. He hadn't known about that part. He hadn't realized how deep his wife's treachery went. Her plan, I assume, was to eventually get a lawyer, have me declared incompetent, and get power of attorney over my finances. Over my house. "Your wish for my death wasn't just an angry outburst, Kevin. It was the logical conclusion of your shared business plan." He started to cry then. Not quiet, dignified tears of remorse, but ugly, gulping sobs of a child who has been caught and is about to be punished. "Please, Mom," he begged, reaching a trembling hand across the table. I pulled my own hand back as if from a flame. "Please don't leave me. I'm sorry. I swear I'll change. Tiffany and I were done. I kicked her out. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll get a better job. I'll pay you back." I looked at my son, a 37-year-old man, making a desperate flurry of promises he had no intention or ability to keep. For a fleeting second, the ghost of the mother I used to be rose up in me, her heart aching, her arms wanting to comfort him, to fix it, to make it all okay. But I pushed her down. He had killed her. And I was not about to let her be resurrected. "You're not sorry you said it, Kevin," I said, my voice cold and final as a tombstone. "You're just sorry you got caught. You're sorry there are devastating consequences. You don't need a mother, Kevin. You need a bank. And that bank, its assets and its lone employee are now permanently out of business." I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. I took a $20 bill from my purse and placed it on the table to cover our drinks, a final symbolic act of paying my own way out. The lesson here is that words have consequences. Actions have consequences. You wished for a life without me in it. Congratulations, son. You have it. I turned and walked out of that cafe and into the bright sunlight, without looking back. I could hear him sobbing my name, a desperate broken sound. But for the first time it was just noise. The static of a life I had finally blessedly tuned out. I walked out of that cafe and into the bright Texas sunshine, and for the first time since David died, I felt the full unburdened weight of my own freedom. The final cord had been cut. The confrontation hadn't been about punishing him further. It had been about liberating myself. It was my declaration of independence, signed not with ink but with action. Life in Fredericksburg is quiet. It's simple. And every single piece of it is mine. I joined the local gardening club, a group of feisty, funny women my age who care more about the quality of their compost than about designer labels. My roses, transplanted from a single cutting I took from my old garden, are already starting to thrive against the warm stone of my cottage. I've made friends, real friends, women who have lived full, complicated lives of their own. We drink coffee on each other's porches, we share stories, we laugh from the belly. We don't ask for anything from each other but companionship. I've started volunteering at the local library, reading to a group of rambunctious, sticky-fingered children twice a week. Their uncomplicated joy, their unself-conscious delight in a story about a talking bear, is a balm to a part of my soul I thought had died. They don't want anything from me but the sound of my voice and a funny face at the right moment. It's a clean, simple transaction of happiness. I don't hate my son. I think in some distant, scarred-over part of my heart, I will always love the little boy he once was, the one with the gap-toothed smile who thought I was the strongest person in the world. But I've learned the hardest and most important lesson a mother can learn. You cannot love someone into respecting you. You cannot sacrifice yourself into being valued. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's self-destruction. It's a slow-acting poison that you willingly drink every single day, telling yourself it's the water you need to survive. Sometimes I wonder what happened to him. My sister Laura, with whom I have cautiously reconnected now that the fog of Kevin's lies has cleared, gives me occasional, reluctant updates. Tiffany did indeed divorce him. He lost their apartment. He's working a low-paying salary job and living in a small rundown rental on the other side of town. She says he calls her sometimes, always asking if she's heard from me, if she knows where I am. She always tells him no. Whether he will ever truly understand the gravity of what he lost, whether he will ever become a better man, that is no longer my burden to carry. His life is his own to fix or to ruin. My work is done. My life is here. In this small stone cottage, with the smell of baking bread and fresh-cut flowers from my own garden. It's in the feel of the warm sun on my face as I pull weeds. It's in the quiet evenings spent reading a good book, with no one to criticize or demand anything from me. It's in the newfound peace of belonging only to myself. For all the mothers, fathers, sisters, and daughters out there who feel unseen, unappreciated, and taken for granted, your value is not determined by what you can give to others. It is inherent. You are not a stepping stone for someone else's life. You are the entire mountain. It is not selfish to save yourself. Sometimes it is the only sane, courageous, and necessary thing to do. I disappeared to find myself again. And I did. She was here all along, just buried under years of sacrifice, expectation, and a misplaced sense of duty. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonates with you, if you've ever had to make an impossible choice to save yourself from the people who were supposed to love you most, please share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters. Let's remind each other that we are not alone, and that it is never too late to reclaim your own life. Please like this video and subscribe for more stories.